today with a number of people here in the room with me from the regional office. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all to this 1 hour packed information on the red list of ecosystems for mangroves in Asia. We have our whole team with us today who have been working on this project for the last 2 years. And it's really exciting for us to be presenting the headline of the key findings of the process of red list of ecosystems for mangroves in Asia, and some of the key findings which we would like to discuss a little bit with you, the implications of towards the end of the day. Sorry, little technical issue for a second. So without further ado, it's a great pleasure to invite Dr. Shalani Diani to provide the opening remarks for today's session, and welcome everybody.
Hello. Hello.
We can hear you well.
We
yes.
Hear you well.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can. Very clear.
I don't think I'm visible. I'm visible? Yeah.
You're visible to us.
Okay. Good afternoon from India, and welcome everyone for this Asia Nature Forum. I'm really glad to be part of Asia Nature Forum. That's on red list of mangrove ecosystems of Southeast Asia. I represent IUCN Commission on Ecosystems Management in this meeting. And as many of you know, we are a network of about 1,500 members around the globe who are volunteering their time and expertise in pursuit of sustainability and finding solutions for issues on ecosystems, and especially their relationship with people and culture. We have been encouraging diversity in terms of experiences, disciplines, culture, languages, ages, as well as gender. And there are a large number of expert members of CEM in Asia who give their contribution to some of the key concerns on ecosystem management, and with a special focus on red listing of ecosystems as well as nature-based solution. As you all know, Asia is sensitive in terms of increasing land degradation, climate vulnerability, growing urbanization, developmental concerns, and these are in some of the sensitive ecosystems as well. And many of these ecosystems are host to very rich biodiversity. We all coming in this meeting are having a great understanding that mangrove ecosystems provide an extensive array of ecosystem services that are indispensable for human well-being, particularly in the low-lying coastal areas of developing and underdeveloped economies. These services are widely acknowledged in the warming world, and there is growing consensus to use them for resilience building and reducing coastal degradation. We also know that degradation and deforestation has negatively influenced mangrove ecosystems, and more than 80% of mangrove ecosystems are actually experiencing human-induced pressure and interferences that have resulted in reduced regeneration of many mangrove species. We also understand that more than 62% of global mangrove ecosystems are reported to be declining very fast because of land use changes, predominantly because of conversion of mangroves to aquaculture or agriculture. Coastal mangrove ecosystems in Asia are also undergoing rapid degradation due to coastal agriculture, aquaculture, and human settlements, resulting in rampant and massive loss. Fragmentation of these ecosystems is actually jeopardizing the ability of these ecosystems and habitats to support human well-being in the region, especially by protection from increasing extreme climate events that can also be compromised. We also understand that in spite of more than 100% of mangrove species and 92% of mangrove associates are under threat of extinction due to increasing anthropogenic pressure and climate vulnerability. But there is still not enough mangrove species that have been so far analyzed using IUCN species red listing. So I see this ecosystem health assessment using red listing approach a very welcome and relevant approach, as this is an umbrella approach that will help to understand the ecosystem health of our existing mangroves in Asia In South Asia also, we are fortunate that we are able to initiate participatory driver assessment and its impact on ecosystem services to develop future scenarios of mangrove for our region. We are also hopeful that these efforts are going to go a long way in prioritizing conservation and restoration of mangroves in the region, and also mainstreaming RLE in decision making and policy planning to conserve these sensitive and very important natural ecosystems. I look forward to the further proceedings of this meeting, and I'm hopeful the members and IUCN organizations joining this online event from different parts of Asia will be very much benefited and will be gaining better insights to strengthen the ongoing RLE assessments and studies in Asia. Thank you so much for having me in this meeting, and I look forward to further proceedings. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Professor Ma Keping, I see that you managed to join now. I wonder if we can give you the floor for a couple of minutes, if you would like to say some welcoming remarks, opening remarks for this session.
Thank you very much. Sorry for being late because of the software problems. And
no worries.
First, I would like to express my sincere welcome on behalf of IUCN Asia Regional Members Committee and also the office, and to welcome the colleagues who will present presentations today. The topic is very important, the mangrove ecosystems, and that is one of the most important ecosystems for conservation in terms of coastal areas and say in marine systems. And also the new categories, methodologies on the evaluation of ecosystem threatened status, say the rare list of ecosystems, to take mangrove ecosystem as an example to show the results and also associate conservation strategies, which are very important. And Asia Nature Forum is a series of webinars try to invite established scholars, scientists to present their achievements and research results being shared with members in Asia mainly, and try to engage members and also try to educate members in Asia, which should be very important for practical conservation and future actions. So today, I think is a very important opportunity for Asian members. So thank you very much. Hope we could keep in touch and jointly to push actions related to mangrove ecosystem conservation under the framework of Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Ma Keping. So just to walk us through quickly what we will be covering this afternoon before I hand over to Marcos to kick off the event proper. This afternoon will really be structured with an introduction to the Red List of Ecosystems by Marcos, followed by some of the data and results that we found through the process in the Red List of Mangrove Ecosystems in Southeast Asia by ENIA, and then some conclusions, recommendations, and lessons learned, which will be covered by Don McIntosh, who has been the technical consultant for this program. And then we'll look a little bit at how these results, these information and the data can be used in supporting and influencing planning and policy. And then we'll open the floor for some questions and answers and discussion. So in the interest of time, let me hand over to Marcos to kickstart and talk to us about the IUCN Red List of Ecosystems, how it works, and how it applied it in Southeast Asia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maeve. Thank you very much for the opening remarks, Professor Kepping and Dr. Neri. Much appreciated your presence here. Thank you very much. So I will start by introducing the Red List of Ecosystems, what it is, what uses it provides, and what perspectives, without entering specifically on the results of the Red List of Ecosystems for the mangroves of Southeast Asia that will be addressed immediately after by my colleague Ena Suarez. So my name is Marcos Valderrabano. I'm the Red List of Ecosystem Program Manager here in IUCN headquarters in Switzerland. So what is exactly the Red List of Ecosystems? Because we are hearing it more and more. Some of you may be already familiar with that, but it's basically a global standard for assessing the ecosystem risk of collapse. And I will stop for a moment explaining briefly what do we understand within the Red List of Ecosystem framework as ecosystem, what do we understand by risk, and how do we measure collapse. So defining ecosystems, it's of course very delicate because we are providing boundaries to interrelated systems. For example, mangroves interrelate with seagrasses and coral reefs, and also with land and sediments from the land. But we are using the very generic definition from Tansley, where we assume that an ecosystem is a complex of biota and species and a biotic environment, the interactions among the species and the environment, within physical boundaries, within a space in the globe. Now, IUCN developed a couple of years ago a group of experts from the Commission on Ecosystem Management, the IUCN Global Ecosystem Typology. And I invite you to go through that, either through the IUCN publication that was launched in 2020, through the publication in Nature magazine that came last year and have had a significant success, or through the website adopted for that. Now, this is a hierarchical structure that provides 6 levels of hierarchy, with the first 4 levels assessed in the top level approach. Now, one of these, if you look, for example, at level 3, is ecosystem functional groups, and there is 110 of these ecosystem functional groups. One of these 110 functional groups is, for example, mangroves, that we will be talking later. Those are subdivided then later, either at the biogeographical ecotypes that we will explore in this presentation, or using national assessments and national classifications, like the one that was used, for example, in Myanmar, developed ad hoc for that Red List of Ecosystem assessment, or some countries have their own classification systems like South Africa, and they would use their own classification schemes for assess ecosystems. Now, if we go specifically about one of these 110 ecosystem functional groups, would be mangroves. And this is the first system, the first globally covered ecosystem functional group, for which we are already proposing a level 4 division, means biogeographical ecotypes. And those are these about 39 to 40 units in the planet that have some resemblances of a species. They all behave similarly. The function of the system, whether the mangrove is in the Caribbean or in Southeast Asia or in Africa, the function of the system, how it works, how it retains sediments, how it interacts with the tides and so on, it's similar. But the species composition is going to be significantly different. And that's what this division will aim to address. Now, if we go back to the definition of Red List of Ecosystem, we said that this is a system to a standard for assessing risk. Now, let's just stop one moment. Risk is the probability of an adverse outcome. In this particular case, the adverse outcome would be collapse. This is a mean of informing priority setting, but this is not a priority setting exercise. A particular ecosystem might be critically endangered and not be a priority for conservation because it's too costly or whatever. Another ecosystem might be least concerned with very, very low risk, but may provide very high number of ecosystem services, for example, and maybe a high priority to conserve. So the information from the red list of ecosystem, it provides very useful information for priority setting, but priority setting then brings into account many other elements. And finally, the collapse of the system, it's a transformation of identity. In the case of the red list of threatened species, we assess the risk of extinction. And that's relatively straightforward and still maybe not so straightforward for certain vegetable species where, but still it's relatively straightforward to decide when the species is extinct, but it's much harder to decide when an ecosystem is collapsed because there is a transformation of identity. The place gets replaced with something else. So it's a theoretical threshold. And the red list of ecosystem, the standard for assessing risk of collapse, it's a combination of 5 criteria that are assessed together to determine a standard categories of risk that follow the same pattern as the red list of threatened species. They go from least concern, vulnerable, endangered, critically endangered, and the last level, it would be collapse when the system has transformed its identity. We will look later how we apply those into the mangrove ecosystem in Southeast Asia briefly. But the red list of ecosystem, it also allows to compile huge amount of information about how the system function. We've realized that when we gather people in a room that know very well one system, one ecosystem, some might have been looking at the vegetation, some others might have been looking at the birds, some others might have been looking at the geomorphology or the sediment balance. But so each one have a partial vision of how the ecosystem function. Now, bringing all this expertise together in the room and providing a complete picture of how the ecosystem function, it's very useful later for taking decisions. This is a real example of how the coral ecosystem function. First, when a group of experts in Western Indian Ocean try to organize the information, and then when the information was organized later down the road, that was very helpful for decision making. Now, another interesting element of the red list of ecosystem is that it looks at trends, how the ecosystem is evolving over time. And those trends are looked at from the past. So how was the ecosystem some years into the past until now? But it also looks into the future. How do we expect the ecosystem to evolve? How is the extent or the function of the system evolving into the future? In this particular example, for example, in Mongolia, there was a plan in the 90s to build an hydroelectric power that would completely cover this wetland. Now, a red list of ecosystem in this specific area would take into account those plans and integrate those forecasts into the future. And we intend to do something similar with the mangroves and look into the future to assess what are the expected changes on the mangrove ecosystem. Now, the red list of ecosystems methodology and standard started in 2014, more or less, with the global adoption by ASEAN of the standard. And it's now formally adopted in more than 20 countries. And about more than 4,000 ecosystems have been assessed globally. Most of those have been assessed nationally. So it means countries with their own ecosystem typology, operating at their own scales, assessing the ecosystem. And that's perfect. Now we are starting to assess ecosystems at a biogeographical level, like example of the mangroves we're going to be looking at very recently. Now, the significant update from the Global Biodiversity Framework Kunming-Montreal agreement last year is that red list of ecosystem is now adopted as one of the headline indicators for goal 1. So the headline indicator A1 it's the goal for the goal A, excuse me. The global indicator A1 looks at red list index of ecosystems, and the global indicator A2 at ecosystem extent, and both can be extracted from the red list of ecosystem assessment. Now, if someone is interested in going deeper into understanding how it works, there is a couple of very interesting online courses, one organized by one of the red list of ecosystem partners, the King University, and it's an introduction course. Another one in the IUCN Academy, an advanced course on the red list of ecosystem. And I invite you to go through those or explore the guidelines on the application of the standards. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me or any of the red list of ecosystem partners that may be located near you. I'll stop here and I hand it over to Ena Suarez for an explanation on the exercise we've been doing. Thank you very much. Over to you, Ena.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ena Suarez, junior professional also for the red list of ecosystems in IUCN in Switzerland. So I'm going to show you the results of the red list of mangrove ecosystem in Southeast Asia. This is the result of work with a group of mangrove specialists in Southeast Asia who participated in 7 workshops and provided input through all the process, all the ecosystem description and the red list assessment. So what we did is that we evaluated 5 Southeast Asian ecoregions. So Andaman, that represents 32% of the global mangrove area. So the 5 ecoregions that we studied, that we assessed, are Bay of Bengal, that includes Bangladesh, India, and Myanmar. Andaman, that includes India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Myanmar, and Thailand. Sunda Shelf, Cambodia, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. West Coral Triangle, Brunei, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, and Timor. And last, South China Sea, who included China and Vietnam. So the percentage you see here are the percentage of global mangrove in the whole world. So in total, these represent 32% of the global mangrove area. So the first criteria on the red list of ecosystem is a reduction in geographic distribution. So to assess these criteria, we use the Global Mangrove Watch data, which includes 24 years of data from 96 to 2020. This means the mangrove area in these regions. If you want to visit, you can access through the QR code, and they also have a complete report on the state of the world mangroves. So here we see, for example, in the plots, the evolution of the mangrove area in these regions. So we see that first through 96 to 2007, there was a big decline, but then it has been decelerated through between the last 5 years from 15 to 2020. This is net area, so this is the result from the gains and the loss of mangrove area. Next. So the first criteria, A1, is the reduction of geographic distribution in the past 50 years. This means from 1970 to 2020, 50 years. Using this data and national statistics from the different countries, we calculated what was the reduction in area of mangrove. So for Andaman, we found that there was a 16 reduction, Bay of Bengal 8%, South China Sea 36, Sunda Shelf 35, and West Coral Triangle 32. According to the criteria, if you lose more than 30%, you will be assessed as vulnerable. So the South China Sea, Sunda Shelf, and West Coral Triangle are assessed as vulnerable, but Andaman and Bay of Bengal assessed as least concern. Now, if we look at the reduction in the future, so now we look at from 2022 to 2070, this is just by doing a linear extrapolation using the Global Mangrove Watch data that is from 96 to 2020. We do a linear extrapolation and we calculate what will be the area in 2070. So for Andaman, there will be a 2% reduction, Bay of Bengal 9, South China Sea 11, Sonda Shelf 9, and West Coast Triangle 18. All of them, they're below the 30% threshold. This can be explained more or less because of the lower rate of change in the last 5 to 10 years. So at the end, if we assess this criteria, you can continue, Marcos. You'll be, because all of them are below the 30%, they will be assessed as least concern. Now, if we look at the environmental degradation, we look at the effect of sea level rise and effect of sediment supply in mangroves. So mangrove forests have the capacity to keep pace with sea level rise and to avoid inundation through vertical accretion of sediments. If the sediment availability can enable the mangrove forest to maintain the rates of soil surface elevation, then they can match the sea level rise, then the mangroves are not inundated. But if the sediment supply is below the sea level rise, then they will be inundated. So this is what we explore. We take some models that are ready-made for such as Southeast Asia, and we calculated what was the area of the mangrove that will be submerged if we have a mid-high scenario of sea level rise. And we take into account also the sediment supply in the different regions using this Lovelock et al. Model. What we found is that Andaman and Bay of Bengal, less than 30% will be inundated. For South China Sea, 50% will be inundated. And for Sonda Shelf and Coral Triangle, we look also at the extreme scenario of 1.4 meters. And we found that they will they will be inundated more than 30%. So according to the criteria of the red list, if it's more than 30%, then they will be assessed as vulnerable, and South China Sea, because it's more 50% that will be submerged, then it will be in danger. Now, the last criteria, environmental degradation, we look at the degradation areas by calculating some vegetation indices from Landsat images. This was for 17 years. The different colors show the area degraded according to these vegetation indices. So you have some areas where it's more than 5%, but some others that is 0%. So when they calculated the total, it was 2%. This information is available in the mangrove restoration map. Also, you can access through the QR code. So what we did is then calculated this area degraded by ecoregion. You can go next. And we found that Andaman 6% when we look into the future. So if in the last 17 years was 2.1, then we do an extrapolation to 2070. So Andaman passes through 2.1 to 6%, Bay of Bengal 5 to 15, South China Sea 5 to 16, Sonda Shelf 3 to 10, and West Coast Triangle 11. So all of them, they're below the 30%. They will be assessed as least concern, but we have to take into account that this was the only data that was available for the whole region, and this doesn't take a look at other factors as plastic or other kind of degradation that can exist in this region. So to end with, if these are the conclusions that we found from the 5 ecoregions, Andaman then will be assessed as least concern because less than 16% was degraded in the last 17 years and 21% was submerged. Bay of Bengal also, because they have a high sediment supply, they won't be submerged but sea level rise. And in the last 17 years, because of the gain that they have and all the programs that they had in this region, less than 8% was lost. But now the 3 last, Sonda Shelf is assessed as vulnerable because 32% will be more than 30% will be submerged, and they have already lost 32%. South China Sea is in danger because 50% of the area will be submerged by 2070, according to these models. and 36% is already lost since 1970. And last, West Korea Triangle also assessed as vulnerable because 32% was lost since the 1970 and 30% will be submerged. More than 30% will be submerged in 2070. So these are the final results. Least concern means that it doesn't qualify as threatened. Vulnerable means that it's high risk of collapse, and in danger in very high risk of collapse. Thank you. Now we'll continue with Don, who will give some conclusions and recommendations and lessons learned on all this process. To you, Don.
Thank you very much, Enna, and good afternoon, everyone. From Ranong in southern Thailand. I'm not actually sitting in mangroves, but I'm very close to the largest single mangrove ecosystem in Thailand. And from the very excellent graphics that Ina and Marcos have presented, I'm going to take you down to ground level to let you see a little bit more about what's actually happening within and adjacent to some of the mangrove ecosystems of the region. And during the preparation of the 5 ecoregion descriptions, we made or tried to make a very clear distinction between degradation of mangroves and deforestation leading to conversion to other forms of land use. And the more that I got into the distinction, the more I realized that they aren't actually clearly separable one from the other, and I'll come on to that point towards the recommendation section. On the left is a typical degraded mangrove forest. This happens to be in southern Myanmar, degraded by over harvesting of wood, mainly for charcoal and firewood, also for poles and timber. Compared on the right to another area in Myanmar where the mangrove has been completely removed to convert to aquaculture ponds. And as we all know, the conversion of mangroves to aquaculture or agriculture has been the main driver of mangrove loss in the past. And Ina showed very clearly that that rate of loss was particularly high in the earlier times, but has somewhat reduced. Those examples are to some degree reversible if it's possible to rehabilitate the mangroves on forest land that's been over harvested, or even aquaculture land that can be taken back and replanted back into mangrove forest. Whereas more industrial and urban conversion is permanent. And this example from Jakarta just shows you the scale of some of the coastal development that is removing large areas of mangrove. Next, please. Similarly, infrastructure development like road building is permanent, and there can be a lot of ancillary damage to the mangroves, not just the direct physical loss caused by the road in this case, but a lot of subsidiary ancillary secondary damage through pollution, through garbage, leakage of wastewater and so on from these coastal infrastructures. Next, please. And obviously, even if mangroves are being well protected, the fact that there can be very major developments of aquaculture, urban development, industrial development, so close to mangrove ecosystems, as in the case on the left from China, there are additional risks of illegal loss or pollution or other causes of further loss, even if the mangrove itself is under some sort of protective policy or legal status. And we very quickly realized that there were also threats that are indirect, that are not nearly so obvious as converting mangrove forests to aquaculture ponds or agriculture. And the example on the right shows very well what is happening increasingly in the regions, that due to coastal developments in other parts of the coast, there is a knock-on effect, an indirect impact through pollution and particularly loss of sediment, the lack of sediment supply to maintain mangroves. And this example from Manila Bay shows very clearly how dredging for land reclamation in one part of the bay is having an indirect impact on sediment supply to maintain mangroves in another part. Next, please. There are also some surprising indirect impacts, or impacts that we perhaps are less aware of, and certainly are much harder to measure. And these are striking examples from the Philippines of a sheer volume of garbage eventually leading to a fire in a mangrove forest. And on the right, oil pollution, an ongoing threat from the very large quantities of marine traffic and coastal harbors and oil refineries and so on that are developing within the region. Next, please. In addition to the development threats, mangrove degradation or conversion due to development activities, we looked also at threats from climate change. And there are two main aspects of climate change that threaten mangroves. One is sea level rise, which Enna has very clearly explained that it's quite measurable in terms of using the projected sea level rise to the end of the century. But the other major threat is from the increasing frequency and severity of mangrove cyclones or typhoons. And what surprised me when I looked at this with the help of many of the region's mangrove experts is that the damage caused by cyclones or typhoons, it may not be permanent, but it can be very long lasting. And the two examples here on the left, you see severe erosion from Cyclone Aila in Bangladesh, where because of sediment loss, it's going to be very difficult for the mangrove to recover. And on the right, damage even after 10 years following Super Typhoon Haiyan, where because of forest destruction, there's been very little evidence of natural recovery of the mangrove, even after those many years. Next, please. But what about mangroves that are well protected? Are they still at risk of other threats? The Sundarbans, the biggest mangrove ecosystem in the region by far, has a number of protection policies and legal status. But in addition to the threat from damage from cyclones and sea level rise, there is a threat from increasing salinity. The Sundarbans salinity is increasing and more salt water is moving in from the west, going towards the east, from the India side, going towards Bangladesh, in other words. And this is having a profound effect on some of the vital mangrove species, particularly the Heritiera, which is a major timber tree in the Sundarbans. So we have, in addition to the direct climate change impacts here, we have an additional impact from salinity change. Next, please. And another example from China, as I mentioned, however well protected the mangroves are, when they're so close to major urban centers like Shenzhen City, inevitably there are risks of accidental loss of pollution, encroachment for additional land conversion, a number of reasons why mangroves like this so close to a major urban center have additional risks associated with them. Next, please. And Central Rakhine State in Myanmar, this is a beautiful mangrove area. It's a forest reserve, but it has multiple threats. And one of them is illegal wood extraction from the neighboring regions of Rakhine, which are desperately short of fuel wood. There are major coastal infrastructure developments underway. There is a deep water port, there's an oil and gas pipeline. So the mangroves are very close to what will be a major new coastal development. And as Ena has shown, this is also threatened by climate change. So in this example, there are multiple threats. And the next slide where I'm sitting, the Renong mangrove ecosystem in Thailand, the mangrove itself is very healthy. It's recovered from the previous history of being exploited for charcoal. The charcoal kilns stopped and concessions for charcoal production ended about 20 years ago. And this is now a very healthy mangrove ecosystem that is playing a vital role in holding floodwater and sediments that would otherwise come down from the very steep mountain range behind the mangrove. But there is an indirect threat that has now emerged because Thailand banned charcoal production. The charcoal kilns have been relocated in southern Myanmar. So the importance of viewing mangrove ecosystems from an eco-regional perspective rather than just a national or subnational perspective is very clearly shown from this example, that the mangrove in Ranong in southern Thailand has recovered very well, but by stopping charcoal production in Thailand, it's pushed charcoal production to increase in neighboring Taninthayi region in southern Myanmar. So we can't just look in isolation at the mangrove by area. We have to look at what's happening around the mangrove and even in adjacent countries and districts. Next, please. So coming on to our conclusions, these are just a few highlights from a much more elaborate list of about 20 points. The main conclusion, first of all, is that the threats to mangroves in all of the 5 ecoregions are multiple. They may be more or less due to illegal cutting of wood or conversion to aquaculture or agriculture, or they may be more directly due to industrial development. But the point is, the threats are multiple and they very often operate together. As I showed in the example of Chokpu in central Rakhine, you can have several threats operating at the same time on the same mangrove ecosystem. And similarly, the threats are quite similar, broadly speaking, region to region, but they vary tremendously in the scale and impact that they're having. So obviously, where you have major urban and industrial developments, for instance, the inner Gulf of Thailand here, you have much greater impact on the mangroves than, say, the eastern islands of Indonesia, where we still have some very beautiful pristine or near pristine mangroves, say in the Malacca Islands. But the threats themselves are broadly similar. We are still seeing the very traditional overharvesting of mangrove wood and other products, and we are seeing conversion to agriculture and aquaculture. But these threats have probably slowed, whereas the indirect threats, particularly diversion of fresh water for agriculture, is continuing to be a major risk. Lack of fresh water reaching the coast, lack of sediment supply reaching the coast are very significant indirect impacts, as well as in some cases direct impacts on mangrove degradation and loss. Anna mentioned a particular risk that the South China Sea faces due to sea level rise. And the 5 ecoregions do differ significantly in their capacity to cope with sea level rise. And that is related to the mangrove's ability to trap and hold suspended sediments. It's estimated that a healthy mangrove forest can build the shore by a level of about 6 millimeters per year. And where you have a modest rate of sea level rise, that could be sufficient for the mangrove forest to keep pace with the rising sea level. But as in the South China Sea region, where you have a overall lack or shortage of soft sediments, the impact of sea level rise is going to be a particularly high risk. From the many recommendations that have been developed and are still being formed, I think the critical one for me is that we can't afford to wait until we define ecosystem collapse as no mangroves. That's too late for any hope of recovery in many cases. So we're recommending that some form of early warning indicators would be very advantageous. Changes in the sediment dynamics, particularly indicators that show that sediment supply is being diminished, and signs of stress in the vegetation could be very useful early indicators to allow us to then instigate mitigation measures that could prevent further degradation and loss leading to collapse. We've really only touched the surface by looking at the change in mangrove area in the 5 ecoregions. And clearly what's needed now is for the countries themselves to start looking at Unit 5 and Unit 6 levels, the national and subnational levels, to really try to understand whether mangrove management, conservation management, protected areas, rehabilitation measures, community-led mangrove governance measures, what are the relative successes and failures of the various measures that are being implemented to try to halt further mangrove loss and restore ecosystem functions? And will replanted, rehabilitated mangroves actually restore the same degree of ecological health that natural mangroves provide? And all the evidence so far is yes, as long as the rehabilitation is done well and the mangroves are managed properly for a long enough period for the key ecological functions to recover. And that leads me to the final point, that because of the importance of ecological function, we need to put more emphasis on conserving even the very small areas of natural or near natural mangrove that are left, or areas like in Renong here where I am, that have successfully rehabilitated mangroves over a long period of time, such that the rehabilitated mangroves are ecologically stable and are themselves reproducing and contributing to future mangrove species, both plants and animals. And with that little hint on policy, I'll hand over to Maeve, who's going to talk to us about planning and policy leading to better practice.
We go. Hello. Sorry. Thank you, Enya, Marcos, and Don. Thank you very much for the background. You have it now, folks, in front of you, the historic data analysis, the future predictions, and some of the key highlights in terms of threats and lessons that we're learning from this data. I think this is the point in the conversation where we start to move towards the discussion and inviting all of you in the virtual room to support us in taking these headlines, this data and information, this hard evidence about the predictions to the broader world. And of course, many of you will have within your own spheres of influence a lot of influence on planning policy and planning practice. And so as we move to the discussion, it would be to talk with you a little bit about how you recommend we share this data and information. Can you have the next slide, please? So in addition to the future predictions in terms of sea level rise and the past analysis of loss of area of mangroves and the particular threats to South China Sea and the Sunda Shelf, We want to do, of course, everything we can to prevent any further loss and to improve the restorative capacity of our systems to bring back mangroves. This here is just a very, very bullet point summary of some of the key issues. Don has gone into detail about mangrove degradation and destruction and the indirect and direct drivers of that. But when you look at them together, you can see that much of this can be solved through holistic, integrated planning processes from national to local level. And we have a number of models that are demonstrated in this region, in other regions, of how we can restore mangroves effectively at the community level that we can promote. But really, from a planning perspective, I think what is absolutely critical now is that we highlight the importance of valuing mangrove ecosystems for their many ecosystem services, all of which we are familiar with here, not just the productive services, but the critical services for shoreline protection, sediment and soil renewal. Many countries, we do have good policy that protects mangroves. But we very rarely see good integrated management planning happening at the local level. So many of these issues which Don has mentioned, the diminishing freshwater flow to the environment, sediment loss within the systems, is happening in an incremental and cumulative way. So we're losing mangroves, small areas of mangroves or degraded mangroves in a small, but the incremental and cumulative impact of that loss within a system is highly significant. And so with improved management planning and spatial planning at an area-based level will be critical in actually understanding where the remaining mangroves are that need immediate protection, but also in terms of how we can plan and manage the restoration of mangrove systems as a whole within these ecoregions. I think what is also critically important is that concept of ecoregion management, that many of these issues are transboundary. Many of the concerns and interests to protect mangroves are a joint multi-country interest that we need to be looking at in a transboundary manner as well. We are moving further towards the recognition of mangroves in the protected and conserved areas work, but there's still a lot more we can be doing in terms of looking at marine protected areas that conserve mangroves, but also conservation models which also meet the interests of future protection of biodiversity of mangroves and of mangroves and associated biodiversity. And I think there's a lot we can do here in future in terms of nesting these protected and conserved areas management planning within the broader integrated planning policy, that we can both protect and conserve and restore mangroves into the future. So with that in mind, and I'd like to open the floor to questions and answers to the team and a discussion on how you think we can take this valuable piece of work and all the data behind it out into the broader world, that we can influence positive action towards conservation and protection of mangroves. Thank you. Within the room, Rakib, please.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you, Maeve. It's a brilliant presentation. Differentiating the climate change actual impact and how mangrove actually can cope. In our part of the world, I'm talking about South Asia, especially from Bangladesh, climate change has taken the center stage. Everything goes to climate change, all the tension, and there is a tendency of dramatizing the description. I mean, rightly you say from the presentation that yes, climate change has an impact, but it needs to be understood in context. And when you can present it, then you can also talk about the man-made situations which contributes to the climate change, like sedimentation loss, freshwater flow, diversion, because all man-made. These are not climate change. I think this is a fantastic idea to bring back the attention from climate change. Of course, we need to discuss about climate change, but climate change in the context. And this is the actual impact, and these are the actual drivers for mangrove change. We still do need to talk about climate change, But there is a caveat. I think this is very important. Maybe we can do a national level presentations in all the countries and take back, try to support the policymakers to get the right attention on the right issues, not just one issue which is kind of engulfing on everything. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Khalid Pasha, please.
Yeah, just to add to what Rakib said just now, it was quite interesting to understand the impact beyond climate change, because usually when we talk about the coastal areas, it's largely all discussion polarized towards the climate change. And one of the interesting things, and maybe if I may ask, is also within South Asia when the study was done, because I would look at Singapore, which is a huge example and a good example of how 90% of the mangroves have been lost just through urbanization. And there's got nothing contribution to the climate change into that. So how do we really tackle those problems in the coming years as the developmental pressures would become high and high on some of these Southeast Asian developing countries, especially within this region, and also looking at maybe some of the examples from the island countries, maybe like Maldives, because that would be interesting to understand. Again, not from the perspective of climate change, but from the perspective of the development. So I'm more keen looking at your presentation, looking at the other side now, that more than the climate change, probably the impact which the developmental activities which are going to have on these coastal areas, which may further escalate the situation and make it much more vulnerable, these ecosystems. And lastly, how could we, as we move from here to 2030, how could we really, through the national dialogue, and get this process embedded into the National Biodiversity Action Planning, the NBSAPs, because the NBSAPs have now to be realigned with the ask of the new GBF targets and the goals. So how could this work be used in informing and upgrading the NBSAPs within the national plan itself? That's it from my side.
Thank you.
Mahmoud Asachima, and I'm country representative of IUCN. An honor to be with this session. Very, very informed presentation, very well informed. Pakistan stands a success story now as far as mangroves threats that we have been studying in 90s and early 2000, but we have worked in Pakistan on opportunities. Government of Pakistan, IUCN worked together, and more than 50,000 hectares of plantations have been added. And this is a total complete picture. And I would encourage this forum to study Pakistan's success story. Government of Pakistan, IUCN, over 15,000 hectares. There is a change in this ecosystem, whole ecosystem. Pakistan Navy, non-traditional approach, 7.5 million mangroves have been added to this ecosystem. And I think the positive move that has come, there are a couple of considerations that we need to. One, that is a joint venture, the public sector, the private sector, the non-traditional approaches that we brought in. The second, I think it was not, post this national coordinating body, Mangroves for Future, which other countries abandoned or, completed the program. But in Pakistan, we are continuing. That serves as a basis, that joint venture, the different ministries working together. And this investment has brought a very, very positive change. And we are now going to further make an assessment in coming year. Overall, under this 10 billion tree tsunami program, IUCN, FAO, WWF, we are working together, and the study that you have presented, similar, the ecosystem, the benefits that mangroves provide, and overall health of the mangroves in Pakistan, we are going to study and we will definitely benefit from these relevant experts. Thank you very much. And I was so pleased on behalf of IUC in Pakistan being part of this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could we also invite our participants who are attending online? I can see that there is one hand up from Ayanta Abhay. Can you please unmute your microphone and ask your question, please? Thanks.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, thank you very much for providing me for the get some of the consents which related with the IUCN Red List protocol. Actually, we also conducting a pilot scale project on IUCN Red Listing ecosystem on selected mangrove ecosystem in Sri Lanka. So actually, we just have a few difficulties which related with how to when we imply this protocol, especially these ecosystems, especially this mangrove ecosystem are really small distribution in Sri Lanka. We can identify very small distributions. So when we go forward with analyzing the spatial distribution, especially criteria A and not criteria A, criteria B, we have a few difficulties how to imply this kind of criteria for this kind of small ecosystem, especially as an island country. We have very small patches around Sri Lanka, so how we can imply this one, as well as I think this will be a really good platform to share the experience, how to imply this kind of methods for the small scale mangrove ecosystem around the Asia as well as a whole globe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Abhay Gunwardana. Would you like to answer some of these questions, or would you like to take one more question?
Yeah, I think maybe Marcos will have something to say, because one of the very big interests we have as a team is to promote the national red list of ecosystems for mangroves in a number of these participating countries. So, Marcos, any response on that question about small size mangrove habitats and how to apply this analysis?
Yeah, I would love to discuss this further. Maybe we can do that bilaterally on how to apply in a small patches of land. And that's something that has already been raised by, for example, a national red list in a small country like Lebanon with 10,000 square kilometers. How does it apply if the threshold for criterion B is for much bigger? And there is certain number of recommendations in the guidelines, but I would be very happy to have a separate conversation on that. And I'm very happy to see the interest of Sri Lanka in conducting this national red list. So please don't hesitate to write a separate email or put your contacts, and we can organize a separate conversation. I think the real usefulness of the red list of ecosystems would come when it's applied at a national level, because it allows what the other participant was mentioning on how do we measure urban impact, for example, in Singapore, where the plans for urbanization may grow. And that's the type of forecast that can be done when the assessment is done at a national level. So if there is any other countries that want to take this further and then build a national red list of ecosystem into the NBSAPs and develop that, I'm very happy to also support if needed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcus. We have two more questions, one from Bagus. First you, and then from Professor Mark Epping. So first, Bagus, can you please unmute your microphone?
Okay, hello everyone. Could you hear me? Yes. So my questions relate about your presentation and discussion. I noticed because about the climate change and a developing country. Actually, I live in Indonesia, and we are always, how to say, see the conditions really bad in the coastal area. And my question is, do you have like a program in Demak Regency? Because I think in Demak Regency, Indonesia got so many, how to say, it's like impact from climate change. So many villages move to another place because without land to this. So yeah, my question is about, do you have some programs, UECN or something else to in the agency like that? So, and then we have a case like about policy. So industry area grow up fast and then make a land subsidence, but I think government don't have responsibility to decrease about land subsidence. So every time floating from the sea always increase days by day. So it's really dangerous, I think. So that's all. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you for raising this particular interest from Damak. In quick response to, do we have any initiatives? I'm not aware of any at the moment, but I think it's really important to raise that specific concern and interest. Thank you for that. And we can continue to share ideas on opportunities as they arise.
Thank you. Professor Mao. Yeah, Professor Mao, please ask.
Yeah, thank you very much, Raj. And I would like to express my thanks to all of the speakers for your excellent presentations. And I also highly appreciate your research with a focus on both Asia and mangroves. These two are both very important, and I really have interest in this approach. And I'm thinking if we could consider try to link the results of this project with Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, such as action target number 1 is about high valued area and ecosystems being conserved with zero loss, and how to apply this to mangrove ecosystems. And action target number 2, that is effectively restored 30% of degraded ecosystems. Action target number 3, that is the famous 30 by 30 targets for protected areas. And I mean, if we could apply such kind of action targets to mangrove ecosystems, and if we can do so, we can more efficiently to support the implementation of Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework regionally. I refers to Asia. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Very, very valuable. Thanks for anchoring us in the obvious global biodiversity framework targets. Thank you.
Any final comments?
I don't see any further hands. Are there any final comments before we wrap up? Otherwise, I would be handing over to Raj for sort of conclusions and thanks.
Okay, so with this, our webinar, Asia Nature Forum, comes to an end. And I'd really like to thank all our speakers who participated and made very useful, informative presentations today. And I've noticed that some of you have been sharing comments in the text box, chat box, that you'd like to see a copy of the presentation. So we would definitely share with you with permission from our speakers. And if you'd like to get in touch with any of our speakers to know more about mangroves, ecosystems, or red list of ecosystems, please, you can reach out to me and I can connect you to our relevant colleagues in the region. And thank you all for your participation. Let me also ask Professor Ma if he has any final words of thanks, please. Professor Ma, over to you.
Thank you very much, Raj. I would like to express my sincere thanks again to all of the speakers and also the organizers of this webinar, and also the participants from different countries or areas of Asia mainly. I noticed that. I really hope in the future you will still have interest in the Asia Nature Forum, the future webinars. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. See you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.